You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast.
When we founded Coronet Blockchain, we were looking for a technology that will deliver at scale. A long story short, within about 36 months, we have moved the business from a startup capital of $500 into making $2 million. So we're asking ourselves questions like, how can we do what we did for this business at scale? What if instead of creating 40 jobs, we could actually create 1 million jobs? I often say that I might be the first woman to be a part of something, but I definitely won't be the last.
Stay tuned as we bring you inspiring people who are unlocking Africa's economic potential. You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast with your host, Tessa Adamu.
Welcome to the Unlocking Africa podcast, where we find amazing people doing amazing things to unlock Africa's economic potential. We have another special guest, Pretty Kubyane, who is the award-winning co-founder of Coronet Blockchain. Welcome to the podcast, Pretty. How are you and how is the weather in South Africa?
Thank you so much, Tessa. Thank you for having me. It's winter. The weather is winter, and this winter seems to be more nasty than the other winters, so it's very much cold.
Whenever I think of South Africa, I never imagine it to be cold. So that's actually quite surprising, as we're having a heat wave here in the UK.
Yeah, and it's weird because our houses don't have your double glazed windows and all that. So we didn't really build preparing or central air conditioning system and flooring. It's not what we do because we never really face such cold and harsh weather. So it's very unusual.
I think this is probably one of the first times I've not been jealous in terms of the weather in the UK and in Africa. So thank you for joining us today. Before we get started, please feel free to introduce yourself. Tell us a bit more about Pretty Kubyane.
So my early business experience was from a family business. I was born on the eastern side of South Africa, about an hour from where Nelson Mandela was born. And during that time, when I was a child, there was this migration for work where older brothers and fathers were moving into Johannesburg and other mining towns to work there in the mines. What was left in the village was really your professional careers like teaching, nursing, being a police or business. Every second family was just in business. So I was fortunate enough that my family was in business as well. It was in the business of wood cutting and the business of fixing cars that ran as an apprenticeship program that was informal, obviously, because it's the village where my father took in young boys that were not coping in school because we didn't have any system to accommodate those that are not academically acute. And then he would take them, train them, and give them employable skills. So when I later studied public relations, and then I studied a qualification in fashion. But later on, I worked in corporate social investment because it was a default setting to work within a social impact environment where I worked with manufacturing companies and mining companies, the department where they would have to source NGOs and finance them to take care of the communities around them. Later, I worked in management consulting, where we work with scale-ups, companies from $1 million upwards, where we help them to either develop their franchise system or open more branches across the South African landscape and up to the Africa landscape. So it was this job position that led to the founding of Coronet Blockchain.
Thank you for the introduction and the insight of your early life and how you stepped into the world of business. So if we look at what you're currently doing, which is heavily tech focused, can you tell us about your journey into the world of tech and specifically blockchain?
Absolutely. So when we founded Coronet Blockchain, we were looking for a technology that will deliver at scale. When we were approached in 2013 by an ex-colleague who worked with my husband and co-founder at Deloitte. So she has started a business that was running out of her handbag. And then she was looking to actually grow the business. Because she has been working in corporate, she wanted us to put systems in place because the industry might be fragmented, but she doesn't do fragmented because she's been in corporate all her life. So a long story short, within about 36 months, we have moved the business from a startup capital of $500 into making $2 million from a team of 2 to a team of 40 full-time employed. And it had 4 branches from operating out of the handbag. So a story like that in an African kind of economy where women, instead of just sitting at home after being retrenched, can actually start that kind of a business, scale it, and within 36 months, employ 40 families, deemed to make headlines. And our story did, as many of stories like this actually do. So that brought a lot of attention when mainstream media carried the story. It got a lot of attention for many other businesses that are in the similar industry, lifestyle industries. So now we were left to go back to the drawing boards because we know there were a number of supply chain issues we haven't solved, even though the business was doing well. So we're asking ourselves questions like, how can we do this? What we did for this business at scale? What if instead of creating 40 jobs, we could actually help create 1 million jobs? What if we can do this faster than 36 months? And what if we can do it for the businesses in this category, and then we can do it for businesses in other industries as well? So we went out there to seek for a solution that will deliver at scale, do this very quick, and also be able to be reapplicable to other industries as well. And obviously, blockchain was a tool of choice after we've had a chat with a family friend that has just finished a project that they were doing within the food sector. They've just launched a technology called Food Trust. They were solving the similar problems that we had within the supply chain, but in the food supply chain. And then they invited us to their company to present to our business case to them, because they have an accelerator program where they finance startups that actually have got a great potential. And we're among those startups that were funded by them twice in 2020 to create Coronet Blockchain.
Fantastic. So there you touched upon some of the great work that Coronet is involved in terms of scaling up African businesses and how you've been introduced to the world of blockchain technology. When most individuals envision blockchain, they see its affiliation with cryptocurrency, but obviously blockchain has a lot more applications. So what are some of the misconceptions about blockchain that you would like to dispel?
So I think the biggest misconception is what you've just mentioned now, with blockchain being confused for a Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is blockchain. And because blockchain was first used for within finance in cryptocurrencies, and Bitcoin being one of the big, more dominant brands or products that were created by blockchain, so people tend to confuse it in that regard. You can look at crude oil, for example. Yes. Crude oil as an ingredient and a base and an enabling ingredient has got about over 6,000 products that you can make. But crude, for example, jet fuel is not crude oil, but it's a product of crude oil. So it's the same thing with blockchain as well. Cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin are solutions that are enabled by blockchain, but because of the branding and the consumption, that's what people say. Just like how when we grew up, we thought all cold drinks were Coca-Cola and all toothpaste.
Oh, brilliant. You kind of dispelled one of the most common misconceptions with regards to blockchain, and also alluded to the fact that blockchain has many applications, has very diverse applications. So a lot of your work focuses on blockchain for social good. Can you explain what that means and examples of how you are using blockchain technology for social good?
Absolutely. So when we talk social good, there's always a macro, the bigger picture, and micro, which is more on the ground roots and on the smaller scale or more localized. So when we look at macro, for example, the bigger picture now, take SDGs, for example, Sustainable
Yes.
Development Goals. SDG 5 is about gender equality. So how blockchain is implemented there is how blockchain can be used to close the gap within supply chain. A number of supply chains, you find that the most lucrative parts of the supply chain is male dominated, meaning that you find out that sometimes male are paid more than women in that. There's social issues as well as like fair trade and all those kind of things. So blockchain, that's what our technology answers to, and other use cases in blockchain. And then when we look at the micro level of the social good that blockchain does is if the blockchain technology can actually say if implemented in a wine supply chain, for example, if there's a wine brand that owns a wine farm and distribution channel, if it can ensure that me as a farm worker at the wine farm, I'm actually paid, I'm sustainably employed, first of all, and I am paid a fair and industry price or salary price. Because what happens in this, that's why we have those things called ethical supply chains, which is
Yes.
very difficult to police, because you find out that sometimes to cut costs, what these supply chains will do, let's just talk about in the wine supply chain, for example, they will employ people in an unsustainable way, meaning you just show up, you don't even have an employment contract. So how are you supposed to access financial products if you don't even have a pay slip to do that? And some people have been paid with just a bottle of wine, and some are children underage that are working to produce these fancy wines that we end up drinking within the middle and upper income. So when blockchain can actually solve problems for that young man in the village out there working in the wine farm, then that's where the impact it comes. So the last thing I will mention is blockchain when it comes to tracking the impact. Earlier, I spoke about the Sustainable Development Goals. By 2030, 33 trillion US dollars would have been spent to fulfill the Sustainable Development Goals.
Wow.
At first, it was Millennial Development Goals. But when you look at that, does the world right now look like 33 million has done some trillion rather? I know we are not there yet, but we are almost there. So whenever there's money like this, unless it is tracked to find out how it actually doing, there's very difficult to track the social impact it has been allocated to. Or else when we get to 2030, maybe we need to call it never gonna happen Sustainable Development Goals or something like that, because that's what's gonna happen. And to show you how hard it is sometimes with these things, because what happened is these big companies, they will set aside that 33 trillion US dollars. What they do in South Africa, for example, 90% of the entire continent of Africa, 90% of business accelerator program that are created by corporate that contribute to that 33 trillion don't give capital. So what they do, John asked Tessa, who's his friend, who runs a medium business, I pay you 20 million US dollars to come and train a group of African women and just give them the most useless business training. So what they do, they just exchange the money among themselves. Yet companies like Y Combinator has produced over 60 unicorns but we're not producing any of the unicorns. Why? Because when people talk poverty, when people talk about sustainable development, it's just a tick box exercise unless we have a tool like blockchain where we can actually track where the money is going, what is the money is doing, why is it that we say we want to develop Pretty's business, but we are paying Ken to train Pretty, and then we don't even know if the training is actually, why can't we give her money? Why can't we give her seed capital and then give a training and mentorship on top of that? But they will not give money at all because there is no intention to actually develop, is to just look like they are doing development while they are not doing it.
Extremely insightful. So you touched upon the macro and micro factors that blockchain can be used to positively impact. You also mentioned that it's hard to police some of these social goods in Africa's supply chain, and using wine as an example. With that in mind, how do we measure and quantify social good via blockchain? What is the mechanism behind that? What's some of the strategy or techniques that can be used to measure and quantify social good via blockchain?
Absolutely. So what happens is when it comes to social good and social-based project, monitoring and evaluation or compliance is often on the startup end. I'm part of this program, therefore I need to account. But the other people on the other side that are sitting with the money that has been allocated for development, even in government, they put billions saying they want to develop Black industrialists, but 10 years later, there's no such a thing. There's not even a single one of those billions have been spent. So transparency and accountability to an ecosystem that is diverse is what I'm hoping to see blockchain putting all the stakeholders in one platform. We should be able to have government, corporate, others, startup ecosystem members like industry association, plus us, the members of the startup, so that we can actually know where did the money go, how was the impact measured first, because before money is put on the table, they often say by 2030, for example, we want to develop 100 African startups. But then at the end of the day, by 2030, it's just changed. We've rebranded to something else.
I understand. Fantastic. Thank you for that. Earlier, you mentioned the social development goals. So we are seeing a lot more focus on sustainable socio-economic development with initiatives such as Agenda 2063 and the Sustainable Development Goals 2030. Can you tell us a bit more in terms of how your work ties in with these initiatives and also the role blockchain is playing to support or enable this activity?
Thank you so much. So one of the biggest problems in the African continent within the SME, small and medium business, mostly small businesses, one of the big problems is that the industries are informalized. Most of the business are on the informal sector, so much so that over 80% of Africans, they work within the informal sector.
True.
And that is a big of a concern because they are not sustainably employed. That means when they retire, there is no retirement package for them. When they are sick, they're in the mercy of the government hospital, and that is also burdening the government resources. So one of the key things that we focus on is in the area of record keeping. I'll make an example. In the beginning of COVID, the country allocated, I think, 50 billion in grants for a relief for small businesses to say, let's give them a relief fund. But in order to qualify for a relief fund, you had to submit proof of trade, meaning that you need a digital paper trade that proves that you've been doing business. And then companies that have employed over 50 people, have been creating jobs, adding to the economy, could not participate on that fund. Why? Because everything is done on paper and nothing is done electronically. All their transactions, their customers, there's no digital track record that they actually were doing business despite having created so many jobs, and that's what happened, and they couldn't. So it became a matter of agency for many of the brands that we've been talking to tell them, guys, digitize. Formalize your businesses so that you can raise funds easily. You can sell your business if you want to. We're not even thinking there could be such a thing as COVID that may require you to actually have a proof of trade. So that's among the things that our blockchain technology does, because all the transactions happens on a dependable, immutable ledger that you could literally take it to the bank.
Thank you for that. So you beautifully detailed how your work ties into, I guess, the recent sustainable socio-economic development initiatives, and also discussed the importance of informal traders formalizing their work. I think we're sometimes guilty of getting carried away and forgetting that not everyone has access to some of these modern technologies such as blockchain and a whole range of other tech solutions. So from your point of view, what can be done or is being done to ensure that the most marginalized people in society are not being left behind by rapid digital development?
Absolutely. So there's a number of initiatives that are taking place. And sometimes when you look from the outside, one tends to think that Africa is underdeveloped, which it is true, but it is a common thing for a house that does not own a house, or a household that live in a shed, to have a technology that is worth 4,000 US dollars, owning it there. So one thing I know is that when Africans have to get stuff, they actually do get things, because at the end of the day, we are dealing with people that are in business. They cannot always be given charity and be charitable, while when it comes to consuming, they are able to buy that latest iPhone, even though living in a shack. So when it comes to connectivity, which is what people need, in Africa, I think we have about 66 million phones, of which a majority is smartphones. So these days, running businesses, it happens. Some of my favorite businesses is seeing people that are actually using the e-commerce platforms where they are running their entire business from their bedroom. That's one of the things we've been doing now. We've been working with a lot of businesses that own stores, but because the economy is not well and the traffic is not much, we've been helping them to open their online stores and e-commerces, and then connecting them to our 3PL partners to do the shipping and everything that is happening. They keep their inventory at home. They run the entire store on their smartphones going forward. So more than ever today, digitization is way easier than it was in the past, maybe 30 years ago.
Fantastic. So I guess thank you for detailing the work that you're doing to increase access or coverage or the ability for people to be able to use technology in their day-to-day lives. So if we look closer in terms of something I think that is close to your heart, as an African woman who works in blockchain technology, which, as you mentioned before, is extremely male-dominated, can you tell us a bit about the work that you're doing to encourage more women, especially African women, to consider a career in the industry?
Absolutely. So more than male, us as women, we often want something because we saw it from somebody else. So I often say that I might be the first woman to be a part of something, but I definitely won't be the last. So one of those things is platforms such as this. Thank you so much for organizing this, and conferences to drive education and awareness to actually encourage women so that they can actually understand what is blockchain. The second part is also when it comes to employment. I remember we were developing this technology for a client, and because they had such a short term, It's a Canadian-based company. They were supplying Sephora, Macy's, and all these big retailers with their products. And they were given 30 days to discontinue unless they can provide technology that proves where their products actually come from. So we had to develop certain features that Coronet did not have that they actually wanted to own. And we needed to scale our team very fast. So we needed about 8 developers. So we put an advert out there. It reached more women than men, but 100% of people that apply were actually men. And I was very mad because on Monday, I'm out here on a podcast saying, well, we need more women in design team, in technology team, and here. So I don't know if it's discouragement or what is it that sometimes causes women to be hesitant to go out there. But because I can't sleep at night, having an all-male team while I go around saying I'm an advocate for diversity, I had to call in favors. I had to call ecosystems like your industry association, women in technology type of movements to say, this is a profile of people that I'm looking for. I need to find these women. There's no way I'm going to have an all-male team. So where I'm going is that as the one that are inside, A, we need to educate. 2, we can't just dig on the surface and say, oh yeah, I couldn't find any woman who can do A. We have to try harder. We need to go deeper to actually look. And the women that ended up working on the team, they were best performing because not only did they understand the technical features that were needed, but they understood the user behavior or somebody's going to use the technology because the Canadian-based company, it services women. And these guys understood it from the case, from the side of consumer side as well. So I would have been short change, should have just said, oh yeah, women don't want to apply, women don't want to attend. We can't just say that. We have to try really hard to educate and to get them in their room.
So do you believe that obviously if we diversify the users or the people who are kind of working in the technology field, it will increase the adoption and people's trust in technology such as blockchain?
Absolutely. So what drives adoption in all technologies, including blockchain, is creating a win-win situation. People don't really care about tech features. What they want to know is what is in it for me. And blockchain is largely a stakeholder game, especially when it comes to supply chain, because you have the manufacturer, you have distributors, you have logistic companies, you have retailer companies. Each and every one of those, for them to buy into being part of this supply chain, you need to customize what is the benefit for them. Are they going to save costs? Is their revenue going to increase? Is going to help them with efficiencies? Are they going to comply better? You have to know your customer beyond, or your target market beyond technical features. So you have to understand their business needs. That's why we're very privileged, because we understand Africa pain points when it comes to doing business in Africa, because we are business founders rather than being technical founders.
I agree 100%. So you kind of mentioned there that blockchain is a stakeholder game and people buy into the benefits. You have to create a win-win environment or condition. Through that, it's important to understand the business needs and pain points of the users. So if you look at what's happening at the moment in terms of there's almost a push to decentralize the internet where data belongs to the user. In an Africa context, what are the benefits of this?
So when it comes to the decentralization way of saving data, for example, because that's the biggest part of blockchain. On the industry level, I remember yesterday I was seeing on the news, on my news update, where I was looking at the expert who was talking about South Africa's state of retail, how South Africa is recovering. And they had all these detailed analysis and numbers. And guess what? They are not from South Africa. It's a company that is based in Europe. And that's what happens in the entire continent. Our consumer behavior is sitting outside Africa. No wonder all the thriving brands come from outside, because we don't really know what's happening in South Africa. We don't know when it's going, and we know when it's not thriving. On a small business scale, small and medium business, you will remember last year on the 4th of October that Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, they had an outage. Our phones were going mad because the brands that we were working with, 100% of them that are small and medium, they are social media first, meaning their business comes from social media. So all their data is there. And then they were telling us that if Facebook was to not come back, their business is gone, because there's no other way. They don't even have a backup for their data to be able to contact the customers and to trade in a different way. So the ability for everybody to have their data and own their data is very, very important. And the last thing I'll mention is consumer. When it comes to R&D as consumers, you and I, we are part of an R&D program. Some of the big beauty giants, because beauty and technology, they are the most, sometimes they alternate between one and two, beauty, fashion, and technology, especially electronics, phones, and all that stuff. They are the biggest when it comes to being social first. Some of these companies, they spend about $1 billion every year. They used to on R&D, but now they just get the data free because we just give it to them. So now they know everything about our consumer behavior, but we have no data that can help us to produce and understand our own consumers so that we can lean more towards producers than consumers.
Thank you for that, Pretty. You kind of explained in terms of the reliance of African businesses, especially in the tech space, depending on infrastructure which lies outside of Africa, and the importance of people having the ability to hold and control their data. So if you look at that from a policy point of view, are government policies within Africa enabling that type of activity in terms of the movement towards people having control of their own data?
So policy is sometimes just a written word that is on paper. Things that usually hinder innovation is weird enough development. Countries that have invested heavily on certain infrastructure, whenever there is new technology that is going to displace, or rather is going to mean they don't need the infrastructure before government even break even from that project. Obviously, they want to frustrate the innovation, but they can't stop it. They can only slow it down. But in Africa, we don't have too much of that because we're not a very developed. For example, fintech is taking off very fast. Why? Because we are not banked. And I know South Africa has got one of the most sophisticated banking systems in the world. Some of the world's inventions were started in South Africa that are within banking. Yet I think we are sitting only at 16% banked South Africans. The rest don't want it. So technologies such as blockchain, they bring about a cheaper alternative from that. So because the government doesn't have to get their money's worth, they are not really slowing it too much. Cryptocurrencies is another story altogether, but I'm talking about the blockchain being able to help increase trade and get more people to participate within the economy. They are very supportive of that.
Brilliant. So you've touched upon the meeting of blockchain technology and government and the development of Africa. So if we look at the work you do, you have a background in supply chain and procurement, and you've spoken about how blockchain technology can help African governments with the prevention of, say, corruption and stop the loss of billions. Can you explain a bit about this and how this can be achieved?
Absolutely. So I think it goes back to what I've mentioned earlier on when it comes to when I was talking about how social impact is not measurable because there is no transparency as to who are the benefits. Because sometimes when it's a trade between people that are more on the higher LSM, those people have got lawyers, those people have got degrees. What causes corruption a lot in Africa is because it's always a top-down approach. It's always people that are needy, people that need something from the government that they can't hold their own government to account to exactly what is happening. But blockchain is able to bring about that transparency when it comes to actually us knowing that, well, we had 8 billion, for example, saying we're going to invest. I'll make an example in Kigali, Rwanda. Rwanda, I think they've set aside about 1 billion US dollars as a budget to ensure that there's a food security for the country. But how are we going to actually track to make sure that when we speak food security, how many female-owned farmers are going to get from that money? How many women are going to be employed? How many small businesses are going to benefit financially and become a solution to actually ensure that Rwanda has got food security as it comes? So that's where blockchain technology actually comes into play to make sure that on the left hand, government has got all the promises. Sometimes we have to wait until 5 years and then there's a new president, but we can't with blockchain. We can have that real time tracking of, are they actually fulfilling the promises they made?
Thank you for that. So you've explained how blockchain technology can be used to support African governments and different areas of African society. So from your perspective, if we look at, I guess, what you've done recently and currently, have African governments been welcoming or susceptible to some of these ideas that you've proposed?
So there's three kinds of governments. One, governments that don't understand blockchain. They don't understand how blockchain is actually going to solve their problems. So they are sitting on that side. How is it going to help me with unemployment? How is it going to help me with trade? How is it going to help me to get more, to collect more tax revenue? So there's that group. And then in the middle, you get a group of governments that actually understand the blockchain technology and they have been embracing. A month ago, Shadrach was requested by a group of East African governments to map out a use case that is going to improve their revenue collection using blockchain. So that's the government. And it was exciting sitting in that meeting because they were saying, we just want to try. We'll put all the resources that we have. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But if blockchain could be the next big thing, we want to find out and we don't want to wait. So that is something that is very, very good. And the last group of governments is those that actually know, but they just don't want to use blockchain because they have something to hide. But because sometimes when there's a gap in the market, it's been left there on purpose because it serves other people's purposes. So certain government that give blockchain a pushback is because they know the day there is transparency, there's going to be problems for them. And therefore they give it a pushback, not because it's wrong, because they have something to hide. It's not the blockchain that they don't want. It's transparency that they don't want.
Interesting. So you've mentioned how blockchain technology can be used to improve transparency and support areas such as trade, policy, tax collection. So it could be said that blockchain solutions could play a pivotal role in boosting and spurring the growth across Africa. So if we look at specific areas of African economy, which areas of Africa's economy do you believe will benefit the most from blockchain technology?
So I think it was last week, actually, when we had this iconic conference where leaders in supply chain in Southern Africa, I think we had about 29 countries that met together, and Shadrach was delivering a speech there. So he spoke more extensively on that topic, covering manufacturing, trade, and agriculture, because those are the three biggest economies that employ most of Africans when it comes to employment, and that contribute more in our combined GDP. So the Made in Africa brand, the use of blockchain technology, we will see it actually surging and making sure that it's easy for me to have a Ghanaian dress than an Italian dress. Because right now I can't, it's like if I can take my app right now, I can shop. There's actually e-commerce platforms that can deliver that dress to me and I can wait tonight. But if I try to get a Ghanaian or a Nigerian fabric type of a dress, I can't get that. So blockchain will ensure such things are possible. On the trade side, the digitization of supply chain, trade finance, financing of goods and services, including boosting tourism and hospitality. That is a big part of the African economy as well. And on the agriculture, which is the most important and the biggest employer in Africa. I spoke on this in last year. We had an Africa blockchain conference. I had about 30 minutes where I spoke on how agriculture can benefit from blockchain.
You've just detailed how blockchain can support overall trade and specifically agriculture. And earlier we mentioned that most trade in Africa is done informally, mainly by small groups of people, small businesses. So if we detail or go back to something that you discussed earlier, which was that you've used innovative approaches or you've used blockchain to support or scale up small African companies. Most notably was the beauty company, which you took from 500 USD to 2 million USD within 36 months.
Right.
Can you tell us a bit more about this?
Yes, absolutely. So most of these businesses in Africa that start, when they begin, most of the time, they begin from the people that are looking to just put food on the table, unlike companies that begin because there's a gap in the market or because they need to solve a problem that they are also facing. Ours begin because somebody's unemployed and somebody needs to actually put food on the table. And businesses like that, should they not be observed very closely, they have a tendency, because there's no incentive. If now they have food on the table, there's no incentive for them to continue growing, but for them to actually be able to have vision to do that. And one of the big problems that they would face when it comes to reaching a scale-up stage is issues like paying tax. And they are very bitter about that, because in the beginning, they're like, the government always come when we are bringing millions to collect tax, but when we are starting, there's absolutely no support that we are getting. Being able for them, because sometimes when you look at them, but it's like, but you were not even compliant. You could not even afford the help that you actually need. Why? Because compliance has been expensive, but blockchain is making compliance to be more democratized so that more people can afford to have the compliance that it needs for them to benefit more, so that we can see more companies that move from a very small startup and being able to reach the goal that we're able to reach elsewhere.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Pretty. So you've given us great insight into how blockchain technology can be used to scale up a business. What advice would you give to people or business owners in Africa who are interested in exploring blockchain as a business option or solution?
So I would say the good place to start is education. They need to educate themselves. And there's three ways where they can learn. One, there's podcasts, There is events and conferences that they can attend. They need to pay for those and go and attend those industry events. 2, they can get your micro credentials where you take a course, which is like 3 months, 2 months, where you can actually learn. That is usually from a perspective of a non-technical business people that just want to understand how blockchain will work in my supply chain, or how blockchain will help me to curb the counterfeits rate in my business and stuff like that. And then the last way of education is when you can get the qualification. So because we need more technical skill on the business side as well, because blockchain is no longer new, Today, there's live use cases of blockchain for everything. So you need to find those best practice where blockchain is being used in your industry, where you can learn in real life what it can do for your business, so that maybe you don't want to risk. And the last part is all about more African tech startups in blockchain. We need more of those because we have to own the IP of blockchain. Because if it's created outside, then we're going to be at the mercy of wicked design protocols where we have to wait until a hailing system came in Africa and is the most dominant one. And we had to wait until the biggest e-commerce companies come to Africa, yet we're just here. So when it comes to blockchain as well, I look forward to having like 1,000 Coronet types of companies emerging.
Thank you for that. So you've highlighted the importance of education in understanding technology, specifically blockchain, and how blockchain, realistically, it's no longer new. So if we look forward at new technology and Africa going forward in terms of the future of Africa and the convergence of technology and the role it plays in Africa, where do you see Africa in 5 years' time from a blockchain perspective?
So in 5 years, like I mentioned, the 3 industries, when it comes to trade, we're going to see more e-commerce platforms that are going to run on blockchain so that trade is consolidated, market is consolidated. We're going to see more goods and services. Already that is a big thing, being paid in cryptocurrencies. Like us, because Coronet, more than 80% of our business come from outside South Africa. Already, the majority of our transactions, more than 80%, are done using cryptocurrencies, being paid in that form of payment, because the banking system and transfers is just it's not good for a small, medium type of a business. You can't be waiting for 5 days before you can get paid. You need your cash flow to flow really quick. And the last thing I will mention with is in the next 5 years, we can see mostly in agriculture where blockchain will be bringing consumers closer to the farm.
Fantastic. Thank you for that great insight and I guess vision in terms of where you see Africa in 5 years' time from a blockchain perspective. So if you look closer to home, where do you see yourself and Coronet in 5 years' time?
So our focus, even though our first use case is in beauty, but our focus is largely fashion, textile, and it is within agriculture. So food security is going to take 80% of our focus. Already we are building proof of concepts with a number of farming communities where we are already implementing blockchain with them before we can go more public on that. So those are the 3 things that we will be big on: the beauty, the fashion, but 80% of our focus will be blockchain, Coronet, using blockchain within the agriculture.
Exciting, and I look forward to seeing the development because I've seen how much you guys have developed over the last couple of years, and I'm always excited by the news that you release. I watch closely and obviously keep in contact with yourself.
Quote of the week.
As people, we often have quotes, mantras, African proverbs, or affirmations that keep us going when times are challenging or when times are good. Do you have one that you can share with us today?
Absolutely. I think for me, it's never asking for permission, because in the previous eras, it always had to get this qualification and that qualification in order to be able to achieve something. But today, Africa needs to stop waiting for permission. I'm not saying people must not be educated. Actually, it's stupid to not finish your qualification when you have an opportunity to study. What I'm saying is that Africa, by Africa, for Africa is what I'm hoping to see in this next decade.
That is a great message and definitely the way forward. African solutions by African people for Africans. Amazing message. Thank you for that, Pretty. Thank you for your time. That has been an extremely insightful conversation. And thank you for joining us on the podcast, because I know you're extremely busy. So I appreciate your time. And I look forward to keeping in touch and hearing more about how Coronet develops, the exciting projects that you're involved in on the continent. So yes, thank you once again, Pretty. It's been a pleasure having you on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
We will speak soon.
Speak soon. Bye.
Thank you to everyone who has listened and stayed tuned to the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share, or tell a friend about it. You can also rate, review us in Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcast. Thank you, and see you next week for the Unlocking Africa podcast.